Overall, 2013, it's been a challenging year for law firms, at least from the national level. In terms of what we're hearing in terms of how it relates to Pennsylvania, it is sort of a mixed message. Revenue growth is tough to come by. Most of the surveys out there, at least in terms of the national level, law firm growth is very anemic. A lot of managing partners of national firms are very, down on the end of the year. They're down on 2014. In terms of optimistically growth, and I say this in the forecast article, for Pennsylvania firms, both this year and next year, I mean, most firms, what they're looking at in terms of a positive result is between anywhere from flat to 3 to 4% growth. Having said all that, Pennsylvania firms seem to be faring better than the national firms are in that regard. Most of the survey results show, in fact, Gina just had an article the other day, was it the Wells Fargo? Yeah, and they both had surveys that showed that Pennsylvania revenue growth was actually growing at a faster rate than it was nationally. Now, there were expense issues in relation to that. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how Pennsylvania firms really haven't managed expenses all that well, particularly on the relates to underperforming partners. But that's the other thing. So a lot of the national surveys are showing managing partners as being very pessimistic about 2013 and 2014. Last year, because of issues about sequester, a lot of deals got done at the end of 2012. So a lot of firms did really well at the final quarter. A lot of people nationally, again, have been pessimistic about the end of 2013. Although Zach found in talking to a number of firms, both at a national and regional level, they were fairly optimistic. They weren't going to see the uptick. There wasn't sort of that anomaly with the deals being done in advance of the sequester. But they're fairly optimistic. It's still very much a buyer's market, and I'm sure you've heard that, you know that. It still very much is. I mean, the clients really have a lot of the sway. And I'll get back to this a little bit later in terms of forecasting what firms need to be doing in terms of trying to not just keep business, but advance the ball and get more business and grow their firms. But it's very much still a buyer's market. What I hear anecdotally is clients are still very upfront about demanding things, wanting discounts, price points, questioning staffing issue. The other thing, and we're going to kind of drill down on this a little bit more at the legal, looking more on the corporate counsel side, what is going into their calculation in terms of hiring firms and what goes into the process? Because one of the things that we've heard, and we heard this, back in March, the corporate counsel breakfast we did, we've heard how there's a struggle, more and more of a struggle now with GCs, with their own internal divisions in terms of being able to keep control of the legal spend. There's a lot of efforts by those in procurement and other operations trying to take that over. So given that, they're going to be pressing hard for discounts, deals, questions of staffing, billing, that predictability in terms of billing. Another interesting thing we've noticed is that mergers are very much on the rise nationally. I don't know if it quite say it's at the level it was in like 2005, 2006, and that was really driven by the boom, the legal boom. Now it seems to me, and I'd love to hear anyone else's opinion later on about this, it seems more as either a survival mode or just anything to kind of get the revenue going because it's so tough to come by. But interestingly enough, Pennsylvania firms have been relatively quiet on that front. We've seen, a couple, we called them mini non-mergers. Grabbing up small little firms. But we haven't seen the level of merger activity in Pennsylvania that we have nationally. And, by comparison, back in, again, 2005, 2006, when there was sort of the merger mania going on, Pennsylvania firms were in the thick of it, and they're not right now. And I'm not sure we know why yet. So that's something that Gina and Zach will be digging into. I apologize, most of you should know who they are, but Gina Passerella is our senior staff reporter. She handles the business of law, particularly the large law firms, and Zach Needles is a longtime reporter, and he does the mid-sized firms and the large law firms. And they do a great job. And, they're trying to constantly drill down on this stuff. One of the other interesting things that's going on, too, nationally is there's greater stratification among law firms in terms of the haves and the have-nots, or firms that, were once competitors falling behind. And again, that's something that hasn't entirely happened in Pennsylvania, at least not during this time frame. One of the things you'll see in the forecast article on Tuesday is that I looked at sort of the overall growth numbers. And, the largest firms remain the largest firms. But other than, the overall growth revenue, the gross revenue figures and the PPP, it's been fairly constant what the difference has been over the last, 4 years. So it's not like those firms are pulling even further away, at least not based on those metrics. But that is something that's going on nationally. And it's something apparently that's driving a lot of the industry activity. I mean, I was talking to Robin Sparkman, who's the editor-in-chief of the American Lawyer, and she was telling me that this is actually driving a lot of the merger activity where, Firms looking to aggressively compete with others are growing in other markets, merging with other firms. Other firms are feeling the heat, don't think they can handle, they can hold their own in their own market, so they're merging with larger firms as an act of survival. Another interesting little trend that we've gone on, I guess it's not too surprising, again, back before the Great Recession hit, you would often see a lot of these one-off lateral, high lateral hires. It's in this market, at least in Pennsylvania, it's very much seems to be more of a thing of the past. Where we see lateral activity, it's more with practice groups and these sort of mini merger non-mergers. From a business standpoint, it seems to make sense. I mean, there seems to be a greater comfort level if you're grabbing a whole practice group in terms of you're getting the work and you're getting a support team rather than people feeling hostage by these sort of high-end free agents that they bring in, claiming a big book of business, and a lot of times, as you saw in the late 90s, early 2000s, they jump from one firm to the next every 2 to 3 years. So you're seeing far less of that. Now, the other thing, and we did an article, was it September or August, Zach, about staff reduction and what's driving it? September. That article, and what we found is basically was largely, a lot of it was there was a cultural shift and also driven by tech about a lot behind a lot of the staff cuts. I can tell you that in following web metrics for the legal since about 8 years, since about 2005, that article far and away got more reads, more traffic than any article we've ever done. So clearly there's a lot of interest. I think it's still front and center on a lot of firms' minds. You can debate whether it's right or wrong. I mean, most of the consultants and outside observers will tell you for Pennsylvania, the large law firms really need to look at underperforming partners, not staff. That's where the real savings are. Having said that, everything we see and hear indicates that's still very much on the radar. Firms are continuing to focus on cutting cost, and particularly staff. In terms of attorney layoffs, and I'll get to what the survey results are, what we're hearing and what I've been told is that some firms, some of the national Wall Street firms are fairly ruthless in this in terms of any practice area slows down, they're cutting heads right away. Other firms, most firms are being a little bit more prudent than that, but they're not being too patient. Don't know if we're going to see that in Pennsylvania, but in terms of staff, it's the minute the numbers aren't hitting what they're hitting, they're going to go look at this option. Now, I'm not saying that to scare anybody or draw any panic, just telling you what we're hearing. So, I mean, that's something that I think we're going to continue to follow and to watch and see how that shakes out.